Well, a few days ago, we saw the horrific images coming out of the Middle East as Hamas launched a very, very direct and violent attack on Israel. It's been compared with 9/11. In fact, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations has directly compared it to the 9/11 attacks. Of course, that's the September 11 attacks 2001 in the US, where terrorists used planes to take down the two towers of the World Trade Center in New York. Of course, the scale is very different, but the scale of the population in Israel is also very different. I have some concerns around that, which I'll be putting to my next guest, which is John Ruddick MLC. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us, Topher.
These are sober times, but let's start here at home before we discuss what's actually going on in the Middle East. You've just released a press release 2 days ago just talking about the fairly ugly pro-Palestine protests and the chants and the things that we heard there. Tell us about that press release and what motivated you to release it.
Okay, so as libertarians, we radically believe in free speech. So if people in Australia want to go and protest things, we are generally in favour of protests. However, there is a line that it can be overstepped, and it moves from free speech to incitement to violence. Now, what we saw at the Sydney Opera House this morning was on social media, chants, which it's not been denied by the organisers. We saw chants saying, "Gas the Jews, gas the Jews." Now, I had to watch that a few times, and it is clearly what they are saying. This is not one or two people. This was a significant portion of that crowd. Now, that is not an exercise of free speech. That is an incitement to violence. And that is something which is clearly in breach of Section 93Z of the New South Wales Crimes Act. Now, when you're inciting violence, it has nothing to do with free speech, and this is something that the police should have made arrests.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you're sitting here chatting with me about this. I, of course, am charged with 2 counts of incitement down in Victoria for the crime of encouraging people to peacefully protest. There is no suggestion of any violence or incitement to violence in my particular case. In fact, Victoria Police have made it very clear in their brief of evidence that that's not what they're alleging in my particular case. At this point in time, we have seen no evidence from New South Wales, no movement from New South Wales that we're aware of towards any kind of charges against the protest organisers or participants. In fact, the only arrest we saw was the arrest and release of someone who arrived with an Israeli flag. Can we expect any movement soon, do you think?
Look, I've got some encouraging news, Topher. I've just come back from question time, and I asked the Minister for Police, what's happening with his incitement to violence. And look, I think that there has been a pretty significant public backlash here, and it's been felt in the Parliament today. The Minister for Police did announce that the police have set up an inquiry, and they are asking people to come forward if they identify individuals which were using those particularly obnoxious chants. So that is encouraging. Now that it was all on social media, so with a little bit of effort, I'm sure that they can find the people. Of course, what's different in your case is the police, when you were not inciting violence, you were exercising your right to free speech. They pushed that envelope as far as they could to try and get you. And on this occasion, they certainly appear to be pushing the envelope the other way. But it does look as though there has been such an outcry that the police have formally set up an inquiry to try and identify these people. I would say, Topher, this has been. I've never seen so much public support for Israel as I have seen since the weekend. Not just in Australia, but all around the world. When these things have flared up in the past, there have been elements in the West. Often the dominant position in the Western media has been to be critical of Israel. On this occasion, that there is, I can't remember a time when there has been so much unity in support of the victim in this case, Israel.
It is quite astonishing. I was just looking at images online of the Brandenburg Gate being lit up in the Jewish flag, the Israeli flag, the Flinders Street Station down in Melbourne, my old hometown, the Eiffel Tower, of course, where we saw the Charlie Hebdo attacks in response to a cartoon mocking Muhammad. They're now coming out very clearly in support of Israel in this particular conflict. I have to agree with you. I've not seen that either. But turning our attention now to what is happening in Israel itself, we can simultaneously condemn outright what's been done and yet still want to have a conversation about what's the appropriate response. And that's what I'd like to do, if I may. The attack has been compared by the Israeli foreign minister, the Israeli ambassador to the UN, as being Israel's 9/11, as I opened this segment with. Now, that, of course, brings up some very concerning thoughts in my mind, because in the aftermath of the actual 9/11, 2001, in the US, we saw the invasion of Iraq, we saw the invasion of Afghanistan, which turned into a forever war, a 20-year war, where fathers and sons were invited to both go over there and die in the same war. And then in the end, what we saw was literally the day that America pulled out, the very enemy that they were supposed to be putting on the run were now running the country that they had spent 20 years of blood and treasure trying to overcome. Do you have some concerns about the reaction here spiraling out of control? Should we be talking about Iran in the way that I'm hearing some people on Sky News and other places talking about potentially even going into Iran and putting an end to that regime?
I have faith in the Israeli government and their Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, to do the right thing. You and I did have a similar trajectory after 9/11, where I was gung-ho about the democracy project. Now, what had happened is, after Kuwait was liberated in 1991 and George Bush I did not go into Baghdad, for the next 10 years, there was a significant element in conservative America saying Bush was a wimp, Bush was a wimp, Bush was a wimp. He should have gone all the way to Baghdad. Now, we know now that Bush was right. Bush the first, at least.
Yes.
Then 9/11 came along, and that element, which had been, endlessly saying that Bush was a wimp, they used 9/11 to say, oh, let's go and do what we should have done in 91. Okay. And that turned into a disaster, rivers of blood. The Christian community in Iraq is all but decimated now, and they had been there for 2,000 years, thanks to George W. Bush II. Now, what I am fearful here, I have faith in what Israel wants to do. And I have, I read the Wall Street Journal article last night, which seemed to document that Iran was behind this. If Israel wants to, I don't want to interfere in those in Israeli relations, but I'll stand with them. The concern I do have is that America gets involved in this. America's got I think a lot of people in the Middle East will be sympathetic to Israel today.
Sure.
If America gets involved, which, I know that people like Nikki Haley are saying, let's go in there and, clean them all out. If America gets involved, it's actually going to, I think, make things worse. Because they've had 4 bad Middle Eastern wars on the trot. Let's not make it a 5th. The Israeli army is very, very powerful. They've got a lot of nuclear bombs if it gets to that point, which we hope it doesn't. Now, the Americans have moved a massive aircraft carrier off the coast of Israel. Now, look, as long as it's just there as a presence, I suppose that's okay. But I think that Israel should say, we've got this, America, and we certainly don't want American troops involved in this situation.
Certainly not. I tend to agree with that perspective. I think Israel has broad international support and a very deep remit to retaliate. But obviously, if we start to see atrocities going the other way, if we were to start to see the indiscriminate targeting of civilians, which of course IDF are very careful not to do historically, although there have been some exceptions, but historically their focus has been on not doing that. And we hope that continues. And for as long as that continues, I think they'll enjoy support. But you're absolutely right. The minute the US gets involved, of course, people's attitudes in the Middle East are going to harden. Look, these are very very interesting times, as that classic Chinese curse says. May you live in interesting times. They don't mean it nicely when they say that to you. We live in interesting times. John Ruddick, MLC, thank you so much for joining us on the Aussie Wire.
Perfect. Thanks for having us, Topher.